The massive crane swung overhead at the Ridgeline Construction site as workers scattered across the scaffolding of the half-finished government building. Among them, Morgan Hayes moved with practiced efficiency, her weathered hands guiding steel beams into place with the precision of someone who had spent more than a decade mastering her craft. No one suspected that beneath her hard hat and calloused hands lay one of the military's most closely guarded secrets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun beat down on the busy construction site just outside of Portland, Oregon. The skeleton of what would eventually become the new federal administrative complex rose from the ground, its steel bones reaching toward the clear blue sky. Workers moved with purpose across the site, each focused on their specific tasks in the carefully orchestrated dance of heavy construction. Site foreman Sam Donovan handed a blueprint to Morgan as they stood examining the foundation for the east wing. "What do you think about these support beams?" he asked, pointing to an area marked for revision. "Engineering wants to reinforce them, but I think it's overkill." Morgan studied the plans with an expert eye, her fingers tracing the measurements with practiced precision. "Better safe than sorry," she replied, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned her respect among the crew, despite initial skepticism about a woman in heavy construction. "This section will bear significant load once the upper floors are in place." Donovan nodded, having learned over the years to trust Morgan's judgment. "That's what I figured you'd say. Always by the book, Hayes." He rolled up the blueprint and moved on to the next inspection point, leaving Morgan to continue her work. Morgan had joined Ridgeline Construction 12 years earlier, arriving with impeccable credentials but little personal history. She had quickly proven herself to be exceptional, not just competent, but possessing an almost preternatural understanding of structural engineering, materials, science, and project management. Her colleagues had initially attributed her skills to natural talent and a strong educational background, never questioning why someone with her abilities would choose to work on construction sites rather than in more prestigious engineering firms. As the day progressed, Morgan oversaw the installation of critical support beams, occasionally making small adjustments to the positioning that weren't in the official plans, but somehow always improved the stability of the structure. Her fellow workers had long since stopped questioning these modifications. They simply worked, often better than the original specifications. "Hey, Hayes," called out Eddie Malone, one of the younger members of the crew. "Heard we're getting some government inspection tomorrow. Something about security protocols for the new building." Morgan's hands paused momentarily on the steel beam she was securing. "What kind of inspection?" she asked, her tone casual but eyes suddenly more alert. "Some Marines or something," Eddie replied with a shrug. "Probably just checking the place out, since they'll have offices here eventually." Morgan nodded and returned to her work, but a subtle tension had entered her movements, noticeable only to someone who had worked closely with her for years. Like Tom Reeves, the senior electrician who had been with Ridgeline almost as long as Morgan. "Everything okay?" Tom asked quietly when they broke for lunch, sitting beside her on a stack of lumber away from the rest of the crew. "Fine," Morgan replied, unwrapping her sandwich. "Just thinking about those support calculations for the West Wing." Tom studied her face carefully. In 12 years, he had never seen Morgan Hayes rattled by anything. Not dangerous structural failures, not impossible deadlines, not even the time a crane nearly collapsed and she had somehow anticipated the failure and cleared the area seconds before disaster struck. "You know," he said conversationally, "it's funny how you always seem to know exactly what's going to happen on a job site before it happens. Almost like you've seen it all before." Morgan took a bite of her sandwich, chewing slowly before responding. "Just experience, Tom. You work construction long enough, you develop instincts." "Right," Tom nodded. "Instincts. Like how you knew exactly where to place those additional supports on the Westridge project. Supports that weren't in the plans but ended up saving the entire structure during that unexpected earthquake." Morgan said nothing, her eyes scanning the construction site with the practiced assessment of someone constantly evaluating her surroundings. "Or how about the time you spoke perfect French to those Montreal investors who showed up unexpectedly?" Tom continued. "Or when you identified that structural flaw in the Harborview Tower by just looking at it, a flaw that 3 engineering firms had missed in their assessments. "What's your point, Tom?" Morgan asked, her voice level but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Tom held up his hands. "No point. Just observations from working alongside you for a decade. Everyone's got their mysteries, Hayes. Yours just happened to be more interesting than most." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The afternoon brought unexpected complications. As Morgan was inspecting the Eastern Foundation, a government sedan pulled into the construction site, a day earlier than expected. 3 men in Marine Corps dress uniforms emerged from the vehicle, accompanied by a civilian wearing a Department of Defense identification badge. Site Foreman Donovan hurried to greet them, clearly surprised by their early arrival. Morgan watched from a distance, her body language subtly shifting as she observed the Marines surveying the construction site. When one of them, a tall officer with colonel's insignia, glanced in her direction, she turned away casually, adjusting her hard hat to partially shield her face. "That's weird," Eddie commented, working nearby. "Inspection wasn't supposed to be until tomorrow." Morgan nodded absently, keeping her focus on her work while maintaining peripheral awareness of the Marine contingent as they began their tour of the site. She methodically completed her inspection of the foundation supports, then moved to another area of the construction site, always maintaining distance from the visitors. The strategy worked until mid-afternoon, when the inspection group approached the section where Morgan was working. She heard their footsteps and Donovan's voice explaining the construction timeline but kept her back turned, hoping they would pass by quickly. "The structural integrity of this section exceeds federal requirements by nearly 40%, Donovan was saying proudly. "Our lead structural specialist insisted on the additional reinforcement." "Your specialist has good instincts," the colonel replied. "This building needs to withstand significant stress scenarios." Morgan continued working, her movements deliberate and focused, but she could feel the weight of attention shifting toward her. Donovan's voice grew closer. "That's her over there. Morgan Hayes. Been with us 12 years. Best in the business." Morgan had no choice. She turned to acknowledge the introduction, keeping her expression professionally neutral as she faced the Marine officers. For a moment, nothing happened. The colonel nodded politely, his eyes moving past her to examine the structural work. Then the civilian DoD representative stepped forward, his casual demeanor suddenly sharpening as he looked at Morgan's face. "Excuse me," he said, his voice changing. "Have we met before?" Morgan shook her head. "I don't believe so, sir." The man studied her face more intently. "You look remarkably familiar. What did you say your name was?" "Hayes," she replied simply. "Morgan Hayes." The Marine colonel had turned his attention back to Morgan, his expression now more focused. "Hayes," he repeated. "From Portland originally?" "No, sir," she answered. "Midwest transplant." The colonel nodded slowly, but something had changed in his demeanor. He pulled out his phone, typing something quickly before returning it to his pocket. The inspection continued, but Morgan could feel the occasional glances from both the colonel and the DoD representative as they moved through the site. When they finally departed an hour later, Tom approached Morgan at her workstation. "Those Marines seemed awfully interested in you," he observed casually. Morgan continued packing up her tools, her movements precise and economical. "Probably just curious to see a woman running structural operations." Tom leaned against a support beam, watching her carefully. "The colonel made a call right after talking to you, and that DoD guy couldn't stop staring." Morgan closed her toolbox with a decisive click. "Some people have never seen competent women in construction. Not my problem." But as she drove home that evening to her modest apartment on the outskirts of Portland, Morgan knew something had shifted. For 12 years, she had maintained her cover flawlessly, a skilled construction specialist with an unremarkable background and impeccable professional credentials. The life she had carefully constructed was as solid as the building she helped create, every detail meticulously engineered to withstand scrutiny. She parked her truck in its usual spot and climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment, checking the nearly invisible markers she always left on her door, a small piece of clear tape, positioned precisely at the corner. It was undisturbed, indicating no one had entered in her absence. Inside, Morgan moved through her evening routine with the same efficiency she displayed on the construction site. Her apartment was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with few personal items beyond some generic landscape paintings and bookshelves filled with engineering textbooks and technical manuals. After a quick dinner, she sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop, connecting through several layers of security before accessing an encrypted email account that hadn't been used in years. There were no new messages, but she hadn't expected any. This was simply a precaution, a check-in with a system that had remained dormant for over a decade. Morgan closed the laptop and walked to her bedroom closet. Behind a false wall, concealed by hanging clothes and secured with a biometric lock disguised as an electrical outlet, was a small safe. Inside lay the only evidence of her life before Ridgeline Construction, a military identification card bearing the name Major Morgan Everett, United States Marine Corps, Force Reconnaissance. The photo showed a younger version of herself in dress uniform, her expression formal and determined. Beside it was a medal, the Navy Cross, awarded for valor in combat operations that remained classified at the highest levels. She studied these items briefly before returning them to the safe and securing the hidden compartment. If her suspicions were correct, the Marine colonel had recognized her, or at least thought he had. The question now was whether he would pursue that recognition or dismiss it as coincidence. Morgan had spent 12 years hiding in plain sight, building a life and identity so convincing that even those who worked alongside her daily never questioned her background. She had become Morgan Hayes so completely that sometimes days would pass when she didn't think about Major Everett at all. But she had always known this day might come, when her past would resurface and the carefully constructed identity would begin to unravel. She had prepared for it meticulously, with contingency plans and exit strategies developed with the same precision she applied to her engineering work. The next morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. Morgan followed her usual routine, arriving at the construction site precisely at 6:30 a.m., 30 minutes before most of the crew. She had always used this quiet time to review the day's plans and inspect critical areas without interruption. Today, however, she found she wasn't alone. The Marine colonel from the previous day was waiting by the site office, dressed now in civilian clothes but still carrying himself with unmistakable military bearing. He was alone, without the DoD representative or other officers who had accompanied him previously. Morgan parked her truck and approached him directly, recognizing that avoidance would only reinforce suspicion. "Good morning, Colonel," she said calmly. "You're here early." "As are you, Miss Hayes," he replied, studying her face openly now. "Or should I say, Major Everett?" The name hung in the air between them, confirmation that her 12 years of anonymity had indeed come to an end. Morgan maintained her composure, neither confirming nor denying the identification. "I'm curious," the colonel continued. "What would drive one of the most decorated force recon officers in Marine Corps history to disappear and resurface as a construction specialist in Oregon?" Morgan glanced around the empty construction site before responding. "Perhaps we should have this conversation somewhere more private, Colonel?" "Blackwood," he supplied. "Colonel James Blackwood, Marine Corps Intelligence. And yes, privacy would be advisable." They walked to a partially constructed section of the building, an area with no scheduled work for the day, and far from where the crew would gather when they arrived. Morgan moved with the same quiet confidence she displayed on the construction site, but her senses had heightened, cataloging potential exits and calculating distances with the instincts of her military training. "I recognized you yesterday," Blackwood said once they were alone. "It took me a moment. The hard hat and work clothes threw me off initially, but I was at Camp Lejeune when you were running training operations there before your final deployment. Your methods saved a lot of lives when they were implemented in the field." Morgan remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "The official record states that Major Morgan Everett was killed in action during Operation Phantom Shield in 2011, Blackwood said, watching her face carefully. "A classified operation that went catastrophically wrong, resulting in the loss of an entire force recon team, except apparently for its commanding officer." "What do you want, Colonel?" Morgan finally asked, her voice carrying the authority that had been carefully modulated during her years as a civilian but now emerged more fully. "Initially, confirmation that I wasn't imagining things," Blackwood replied. "Now that I have that, I'm not entirely sure. The implications of your existence are complicated." "Complicated," Morgan repeated with a slight nod. "That's one word for it. Classified would be another." "As would necessary." Blackwood studied her for a long moment. Necessary for whom? The Corps declared you KIA. There was a memorial service. Your name is on a wall at Quantico. And yet here I am, Morgan stated simply. Which should tell you something about the nature of Operation Phantom Shield and what actually happened. Before Blackwood could respond, the sound of vehicles arriving signaled the beginning of the workday. Morgan checked her watch. Exactly 7 a.m. when the first wave of workers typically arrived. I've maintained this identity for 12 years, Colonel, she said quietly. I've built a life here. More importantly, I've built structures that keep people safe. Buildings, bridges, foundations that won't fail when tested. I would appreciate discretion while you decide what to do with the information you've uncovered. Blackwood seemed to weigh his options before responding. I'll need to make some inquiries, discreetly. In the meantime, I suggest you continue your work as usual. Morgan nodded, understanding the unspoken warning that she was now being watched. As they walked back toward the main construction area, Blackwood asked one final question. The others on your team, were any of them as fortunate as you? Morgan's expression remained carefully neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. A shadow of old pain quickly controlled. No, she said simply. They weren't. The day progressed with an undercurrent of tension that only Morgan could feel. She performed her duties with her usual precision, reviewing plans with the architects, guiding the placement of critical support structures, and solving the inevitable problems that arose on a complex construction project. But beneath the surface, her mind was calculating probabilities and preparing contingencies. Colonel Blackwood had departed after their conversation, but Morgan had no illusions that his interest had left with him. 12 years of carefully maintained cover had been compromised, and the ripple effects would soon begin to spread. During the lunch break, Tom found her reviewing structural plans in the site office rather than eating with the crew as usual. Everything okay? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. You seem off today. Morgan looked up from the blueprints. Just focused on these foundation adjustments for the West Wing. The soil composition reports came back with some concerns. Tom nodded, not entirely convinced. That Marine colonel was looking for you specifically this morning. Found him waiting by your usual parking spot. Morgan kept her expression neutral. He had some technical questions about the structural reinforcements we discussed yesterday. Technical questions that required a full colonel to ask in person at 6:30 in the morning. Tom raised an eyebrow. Come on, Hayes, we've worked together too long for that. Morgan set down her pencil and met his gaze directly. Tom, there are some questions that are better not asked. For everyone's sake. The seriousness in her tone gave him pause. Tom had worked with Morgan long enough to recognize when she was establishing a boundary. After a moment, he nodded. Fair enough. But if you need anything at all, you know where to find me. Morgan felt a surprising surge of emotion at his words. In 12 years of maintaining her cover, she had been careful to avoid close personal connections. Yet somehow, without intending to, she had developed friendships with people like Tom, genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared experiences. I appreciate that, she said simply, and meant it. The afternoon brought new complications. Morgan was inspecting recently installed support beams when Eddie approached, looking uncomfortable. Hayes, there's some government types asking for you at the site office. Not the Marines from yesterday. Different guys. Suits. Morgan nodded calmly. Thanks, Eddie. I'll head over. As she walked toward the office, Morgan assessed her surroundings with heightened awareness. 2 men in dark suits stood outside the site trailer, their posture and alertness marking them as federal agents despite their civilian clothes. A black SUV with government plates was parked nearby, its engine still running. Morgan approached them directly. I'm Morgan Hayes. I understand you're looking for me. The older of the 2 men stepped forward. Ms. Hayes, I'm Agent Michaels with the Department of Defense. We need you to come with us to answer some questions regarding a security matter. What kind of security matter? Morgan asked, her voice level. One that requires a more secure setting for discussion, Michaels replied smoothly. This won't take long. Morgan could see Sam Donovan watching worriedly from inside the office. Several crew members had paused their work to observe the interaction, including Tom, whose expression showed growing concern. Let me inform my foreman and get my things, Morgan said, buying a moment to think. That won't be necessary, the second agent interjected. This is a time-sensitive matter. Morgan recognized the situation for what it was. Not an invitation, but an extraction. Colonel Blackwood's discreet inquiries had evidently escalated more quickly than anticipated. The question now was whether these men were legitimate DoD personnel or representatives of someone else who had learned of her continued existence. She made a quick decision. Of course, lead the way. As they escorted her to the SUV, Morgan caught Tom's eye across the construction site. She gave him a small nod, an acknowledgement that might be goodbye. After 12 years of working side by side, it was all she could offer. The agents opened the rear door of the SUV, and Morgan climbed in, finding herself seated across from a familiar face, the DoD representative who had accompanied Colonel Blackwood the previous day. His expression was grave. "Major Everett," he said as the vehicle pulled away from the construction site. "Or do you prefer Ms. Hayes now? My name is Director William Prescott. We have a situation that requires your unique expertise." Morgan studied him carefully. What kind of situation would require someone who's been officially dead for 12 years? Prescott's expression remained serious. The kind that relates directly to why you've been officially dead for 12 years. Operation Phantom Shield has resurfaced, Major. And this time, we're going to need more than your ability to disappear. As the SUV accelerated onto the highway, Morgan felt the weight of her past and present colliding. The life she had carefully constructed as Morgan Hayes, the respected construction specialist with an unremarkable history, was unraveling around her. What remained to be seen was whether Major Morgan Everett, the decorated Force Recon officer with a classified history, would emerge from the wreckage. Back at the construction site, Tom Reeves watched the government SUV disappear from view, a sense of foreboding settling over him. In 12 years, he had never seen Morgan Hayes leave a job unfinished. Whatever had just happened was serious. Serious enough to break the careful routine she had maintained for as long as he had known her. He pulled out his phone and did something he had never done before. Searched for information about Morgan Hayes. As expected, he found her professional credentials, licensing information, and mentions in construction industry publications. What he didn't find was anything about her life before she had appeared at Ridgeline Construction 12 years ago. No social media presence, no college graduation notices, no local news mentions, nothing to suggest Morgan Hayes had existed at all before 2011. Tom put away his phone, unsettled by the confirmation of what he had long suspected. Morgan Hayes was not who she claimed to be. And now, whatever secret identity she had been hiding had finally caught up with her. The SUV carrying Morgan traveled not to a government building as she had expected, but to a private airfield outside of Portland. A military helicopter waited on the tarmac, its rotors already spinning in preparation for immediate departure. "Where are we going?" Morgan asked as they approached the helicopter. "Camp Pendleton," Director Prescott replied. "Marine Corps Base." "You're familiar with it, I believe." Morgan felt a jolt of recognition. Camp Pendleton had been where her Force Recon team had trained before their final, fateful mission. It was also where Operation Phantom Shield had been conceived. As they boarded the helicopter, Morgan caught sight of Colonel Blackwood already seated inside, along with 2 other Marine officers she didn't recognize. The professional construction specialist persona of Morgan Hayes was rapidly falling away, replaced by the tactical awareness and military bearing of Major Everett. "I thought you were making discreet inquiries, Colonel," she commented as she took her seat. Blackwood's expression was grim. "Things escalated. We intercepted communications indicating that others have identified your location as well, others with significantly less friendly intentions." Morgan processed this information quickly. "The same people responsible for what happened to my team." "We believe so," Prescott interjected, "which is why we need to move quickly. Your expertise on what really happened during Phantom Shield may be the key to preventing a much larger catastrophe." As the helicopter lifted off, Morgan looked down at the receding landscape of Portland, the city that had been her home for 12 years. She could see the Ridgeline Construction site in the distance, where her carefully constructed identity as Morgan Hayes still existed in the minds of her colleagues. People like Tom and Eddie and Sam Donovan who knew her only as the exceptionally skilled construction specialist who kept to herself but could always be counted on when it mattered. For 12 years, she had built structures designed to withstand the test of time and the forces of nature. Now, she was being pulled back into a world where she had once built something very different. Operations designed to achieve objectives that could never be acknowledged, utilizing skills that could never be celebrated. The helicopter banked sharply, turning south toward California and Camp Pendleton, toward the past that Morgan Hayes had left behind, and the future that awaited Major Morgan Everett. "I need to know what I'm walking into," she said, her voice carrying the authority of a Marine officer rather than a construction specialist. "If you're bringing me back after 12 years, the situation must be critical." Prescott and Blackwood exchanged glances before the colonel responded. "Critical doesn't begin to cover it, Major. What we're facing could make Operation Phantom Shield look like a training exercise." Morgan nodded, mentally preparing herself for the briefing to come. For 12 years, she had used her skills to build and create. Now, it seemed, those same skills would be required for their original purpose, to protect and, if necessary, to destroy. As the helicopter flew south, Morgan Hayes, construction specialist, respected colleague, and carefully constructed fiction, began to fade away. In her place, Major Morgan Everett, Force Recon Officer, Tactical Specialist, and officially deceased Marine, began to re-emerge. 12 years of anonymous existence had ended in a single moment of recognition. What remained to be seen was whether the secret identity she had maintained for so long would prove to be her greatest vulnerability or her most valuable asset in the challenges that lay ahead. The military helicopter touched down at Camp Pendleton with a precision that mirrored Morgan's own methodical approach to everything in her life. As the rotors slowed, she gazed out at the sprawling Marine base, a place that had once been as familiar to her as the construction site she'd worked for the past 12 years. Colonel Blackwood led the way across the tarmac toward a nondescript building set apart from the main administrative complex. "Welcome back to the Corps, Major," he said, his voice carrying just enough over the diminishing rotor noise. Morgan didn't correct him about her rank or status. In her mind, Major Morgan Everett had ceased to exist 12 years ago in the blood-soaked sand of a classified operation gone catastrophically wrong. Yet here she was, walking across a Marine base, surrounded by the sights, sounds, and smells that had once defined her existence. The building they entered bore no external markings, but the security was unmistakable. Armed Marines at every entrance, biometric scanners, and the distinct absence of windows. Inside, they were led to a conference room where 3 people waited. 2 Marine officers and a civilian woman Morgan didn't recognize. "Major Everett," one of the officers said, standing as they entered. The silver eagles on his shoulders identified him as Colonel Mitchell Davidson, a name Morgan knew from her previous life. "It's been a long time." 12 years, 4 months, and 17 days, Morgan replied precisely. "But I'm not Major Everett anymore, Colonel. That woman died during Operation Phantom Shield." Davidson's expression remained neutral. "Not according to our records. As of 0600 this morning, your status has been officially changed from killed in action to deep cover assignment. Your rank has been maintained, with time served counted towards seniority." Morgan's composure slipped momentarily, revealing genuine surprise. "On whose authority?" "Mine," said the civilian woman, stepping forward. "Secretary of Defense Elena Garfield. And yes, before you ask, this reactivation has been authorized at the highest levels." The implications were significant. Morgan had been living as a civilian for over a decade, building a life and identity entirely separate from her military past. For that past to suddenly reclaim her meant the situation was extraordinarily serious. "What's happened?" Morgan asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Director Prescott gestured toward the conference table where several folders lay. 3 days ago, a secure server containing classified information about Operation Phantom Shield was breached. Shortly after, 2 former intelligence officers connected to the operation were killed, professionally, with no evidence left behind. Morgan processed this information, her mind already calculating probabilities and implications. "The same people responsible for what happened to my team? That's what we need to determine," Colonel Blackwood replied. "You're the only surviving member of the operation who might recognize patterns or signatures specific to these actors." Morgan moved to the conference table and opened the top folder. Inside were surveillance photos of two men, one lying beside an overturned fishing boat on a lake shore, the other slumped in his car in what appeared to be a parking garage. Both death scenes looked unremarkable, staged to appear as accidents or medical events. Captain Lawrence Reed and Major Samuel Bennett. Morgan identified them immediately. Reed was intelligence liaison for Phantom Shield. Bennett was the operations planner. She studied the photos more closely. These were made to look like accidents, but there are markers here. The positioning, the timing. It's them. Them? Secretary Garfield prompted. Morgan looked up, her expression hardening. The same organization that compromised Phantom Shield and killed my team. They called themselves Nexus, a private military contractor with deep connections in multiple governments. Their specialty was acquiring classified intelligence and selling it to the highest bidder. She pointed to subtle details in the photos, the precise arrangement of the victims' limbs, the timing of the deaths coinciding with shift changes for local law enforcement. These are their signatures. Nexus always makes deaths appear natural or accidental, always times operations to exploit gaps in security protocols. Colonel Davidson pushed another folder across the table. Then this will concern you. 2 more individuals connected to Phantom Shield are now unaccounted for. Former intelligence analyst Diane Crawford and weapons specialist Marcus Torres. Morgan opened the folder, examining the information on the missing personnel. They're not dead yet. Nexus is extracting information from them first. How can you be sure? Blackwood asked. Because if they had what they wanted, Crawford and Torres would already be dead like the others. Morgan closed the folder decisively. Whatever Nexus is after, they don't have it yet. Which means we have a window of opportunity. Secretary Garfield studied Morgan intently. Major Everett, I understand you've built a life as Morgan Hayes, but we need your expertise now. You're the only one who knows how Nexus operates, the only one who might anticipate their next move. Morgan met her gaze steadily. With all due respect, Madam Secretary, you've misunderstood something important. I didn't leave the Corps and become a construction specialist. I was always both. The structural principles I apply to buildings are the same ones I apply to mission planning, identifying stress points, ensuring foundational integrity, anticipating failure scenarios. She stood and moved to a wall map showing global military installations. Nexus operates on predictable principles, just like physics or engineering. They're systematic, methodical, and thorough. If they're targeting everyone connected to Phantom Shield, they're working from a list, moving in order of perceived threat level. Morgan turned back to face the group. The fact that they went after Reed and Bennett first tells us something. They're looking for operational details, not just intelligence. And the fact that they've taken Crawford and Torres alive means they're looking for something specific, something technical. The realization struck her suddenly. The weapon system. They're after the prototype weapon system that was part of Phantom Shield. Colonel Davidson exchanged glances with Secretary Garfield. How did you reach that conclusion? Reed knew the operational parameters, Bennett knew the mission structure, neither would have technical details about the weapon itself. But Crawford helped design the targeting algorithms, and Torres was responsible for field deployment. Morgan's analysis flowed with the precision that had made her exceptional in both her military and civilian careers. Nexus isn't just tying up loose ends from Phantom Shield. They're trying to reconstruct the prototype. The room fell silent as the implications settled over the group. The weapon system at the heart of Operation Phantom Shield had been classified at the highest level, a breakthrough in precision targeting technology that could identify and neutralize specific electronic signatures from a distance, effectively blinding enemy systems without collateral damage to surrounding infrastructure. If Nexus acquires that technology, Secretary Garfield said finally, they could sell it to any number of hostile entities. The strategic implications would be devastating. Morgan nodded. And they'll be coming for me next. Not because I know how to build the system, I don't, but because I was the field commander who saw it deployed. I know its capabilities and limitations better than anyone else alive, which is precisely why we extracted you from Portland when we did, Prescott interjected. Our intelligence suggests Nexus identified your location approximately 12 hours after Colonel Blackwood recognized you. They already had operatives en route when we pulled you out. Morgan absorbed this information with the calm assessment of someone accustomed to calculating structural loads under extreme conditions. Then my construction site colleagues could be in danger. Nexus will assume I've shared information with someone close to me, established some kind of dead drop or insurance policy. We've already implemented protection protocols for the Ridgeline Construction personnel, Blackwood assured her. Discreet surveillance, not direct contact. As far as they know, you were called away for a routine government consultation related to the building project. Morgan thought of Tom Reeves and his perceptive observations over the years. He wouldn't believe that explanation for long. Some of them are more observant than you might expect, she warned. Noted, Davidson replied. But right now, our priority has to be locating Crawford and Torres before Nexus extracts what they need and eliminates them. Morgan moved back to the table and began organizing the files methodically, just as she would arrange blueprint sections at a construction site. I'll need everything you have on their last known movements, communication patterns, and personal connections. Nexus follows predictable extraction protocols. They'll have taken Crawford and Torres to locations that offer both security and specialized equipment for intelligence gathering. For the next several hours, Morgan immersed herself in the intelligence files, analyzing patterns and identifying likely Nexus operational structures with the same precision she applied to engineering problems. The military personnel worked alongside her, noting how quickly she transitioned from construction specialist back to intelligence operative. Or perhaps more accurately, how seamlessly she integrated both skill sets. They've changed some of their protocols since I encountered them, Morgan observed, studying surveillance reports. But the underlying methodology remains consistent. Nexus still maintains separation between operational cells, uses commercial properties as covers for their activities, and leverages infrastructure vulnerabilities for extraction routes. She pointed to a map where she had marked several locations. Based on the abduction timing and known Nexus patterns, Crawford and Torres are most likely being held at one of these three facilities. All commercial properties with recent ownership changes, appropriate security features, and proximity to transportation hubs for quick extraction if needed. Colonel Davidson studied her analysis with growing respect. 12 years as a civilian, and you can still break down covert operations like this? Morgan looked up from the files. Colonel, for 12 years I've been analyzing structural weaknesses, load-bearing capacities, and failure points in complex systems. The principles aren't that different. As night fell over Camp Pendleton, the team refined their assessment, eventually narrowing the likely location to an abandoned pharmaceutical research facility outside San Diego. Satellite imagery showed recent activity, power usage, vehicle movements, and security upgrades that didn't align with the property's supposed vacant status. This is where they're holding Crawford and Torres, Morgan concluded, pointing to the facility layout. The main laboratory building has the necessary isolation and specialized equipment for intensive interrogation. The perimeter security is substantial but focused on detection rather than engagement, typical of Nexus operations, where they prioritize early warning to allow for evacuation over direct confrontation. Secretary Garfield, who had remained to oversee the developing situation, turned to Colonel Davidson. Your assessment, Colonel? Davidson looked at the tactical display Morgan had assembled. I agree with Major Everett's analysis. The evidence supports her conclusion, and her insights into Nexus methodology align with what little we know about their current operations. The secretary nodded. Then prepare a rescue operation immediately. I want Crawford and Torres recovered safely, and I want Nexus personnel apprehended for intelligence gathering. Ma'am, Morgan interjected, a direct assault, even with specialized forces, carries significant risks. Nexus maintains deadman protocols. If they detect a military approach, they'll eliminate the captives immediately. What do you suggest instead, Major? Garfield asked. Morgan studied the facility layout again. A targeted infiltration. Small team, minimal footprint, leveraging Nexus's own security protocols against them. She looked up at the secretary. And I need to be part of that team. Colonel Blackwood shook his head. You've been out of operational status for 12 years. Despite your background, you're not field ready by current standards. Morgan raised an eyebrow. With respect, Colonel, I've spent 12 years lifting steel beams, climbing scaffolding, and navigating precarious construction environments. My physical conditioning is probably better now than when I was actively serving, she pointed to the facility schematics. More importantly, I know how Nexus thinks, I can anticipate their security responses in ways your current operators can't. Secretary Garfield considered this argument. She has a point, Colonel. And time is critical. Every hour increases the likelihood that Nexus extracts the information they need. After further discussion, a compromise was reached. Morgan would join the infiltration team in an advisory capacity, providing real-time guidance on Nexus protocols, while remaining in a support position rather than taking point on the entry. As the tactical team began preparations, Morgan was issued standard military gear, so familiar yet strange after 12 years of construction equipment. The utility uniform felt both foreign and natural against her skin, a tangible reminder of the life she had left behind, and the one she was temporarily rejoining. While changing, she noticed a Marine corporal staring at her with poorly concealed curiosity. "Something on your mind, Corporal?" she asked. The young Marine hesitated. "Sorry, ma'am. It's just, you're something of a legend in Force Recon. They teach aspects of Operation Phantom Shield in advanced tactical courses, even though most of the details are classified. They tell us all your team was lost." Morgan finished securing her gear, her movements precise and economical. "Sometimes legends are created to protect truths that aren't ready to be told, Corporal." Before the team departed for the operation, Morgan took a moment alone to center herself. The transition from construction specialist to Marine officer had happened with disorienting speed, yet she found the tactical mindset returning with surprising ease. The skills that had made her exceptional in both worlds were fundamentally connected. The ability to analyze complex systems, identify vulnerabilities, and implement precise solutions under pressure. The infiltration team assembled on the tarmac as darkness provided additional cover. 8 Marine Force Recon operators plus Morgan, equipped with specialized gear for covert entry and extraction. The plan they had developed called for a 2-pronged approach. A small diversion to draw attention to the facility's southern perimeter, while the main team infiltrated from the northwest quadrant, where security coverage had the smallest overlap. As they boarded the unmarked helicopters that would transport them to a staging area near the target, Colonel Davidson approached Morgan. "Major, I know you've been away from this world for a long time. If at any point you feel your judgment is compromised." Morgan interrupted him with a confidence born from years of making life-or-death decisions on unstable construction sites. "Colonel, for 12 years I've been responsible for structures that, if improperly built, could collapse and kill dozens of people. I make critical assessments every day with lives hanging in the balance. That responsibility doesn't change whether I'm wearing a hard hat or a tactical vest." Davidson studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair point. Good hunting, Major." The helicopters lifted off into the night, flying low to minimize detection. Morgan found herself seated among operators half her age, men and women who had joined the Marines long after her supposed death. They regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The legendary Major Everett returned from the dead to help rescue survivors from an operation many of them knew only as a classified case study. Beside her sat Lieutenant Sarah Walker, the team leader for the infiltration. "The men are calling this Operation Phoenix," Walker commented quietly. "Seems fitting, the mission that rises from the ashes." Morgan shook her head slightly. "Phoenix implies a rebirth, Lieutenant. Let's focus on making sure this is Nexus's funeral instead." As the helicopter approached the drop zone 3 miles from the target facility, Morgan prepared herself mentally. 12 years ago, she had faced Nexus and lost everything: her team, her identity, her future in the Corps. Now she had a chance to balance that account while preventing them from acquiring technology that could destabilize global security. The team deployed smoothly from the helicopters, moving through the darkness with practiced efficiency. Morgan fell into formation, her body remembering patterns of movement and tactical positioning that had once been second nature. Despite her years away from military operations, she moved with the fluid confidence of someone returning to a well-practiced skill. As they approached the facility perimeter, Morgan signaled Lieutenant Walker and pointed to a section of the security fencing. "Their detection grid will have a calibration cycle every 15 minutes, she whispered. "Standard Nexus protocol. We have a 7-second window to cross the boundary during reset." Walker nodded, impressed by the specific intelligence. She relayed the information to the team, and they timed their approach accordingly. Just as Morgan had predicted, They detected a brief fluctuation in the security system's power signature at exactly the 15-minute mark, allowing them to breach the outer perimeter without triggering alarms. Inside the compound, Morgan guided the team through blind spots in the surveillance coverage, navigating the facility with uncanny accuracy despite having never physically been there before. Her understanding of Nexus security protocols, combined with her engineer's eye for structural vulnerabilities, proved invaluable as they penetrated deeper into the complex. "Two guards approaching from the east corridor," the point man whispered, halting the team's advance. Morgan listened to the footsteps, analyzing the pattern. Standard Nexus patrol configuration, one lead, one follow, staggered by 3 meters. They'll sweep this section, then rotate to the north quadrant. Walker looked at her questioningly. "How can you be sure?" "Because Nexus is an engineering organization at its core," Morgan replied. "They build their security protocols the same way I would design a load-bearing system, with predictable stress distribution and redundant support structures." The team waited as the patrol passed, then continued toward the main laboratory building where intelligence suggested Crawford and Torres were being held. As they approached the secured entrance, Morgan examined the access panel with professional interest. "Dual authentication system," she observed. "Biometric plus code entry. But there's a maintenance override for emergency services." She pointed to a nearly invisible panel beside the main access controls. "Standard building code requirement, even for secured facilities. Nexus will have modified it, but they'll have maintained the core functionality." One of the technical specialists moved forward to examine the panel. "She's right. This is their version of a fire department override. I can bypass it, but it'll take time." Morgan shook her head. "No need. Nexus uses a standardized modification protocol." She reached for the specialist's toolkit and selected several precision tools. With the practiced hands of someone who regularly worked with complex mechanical systems, she manipulated the panel's internal components. After 30 seconds of careful adjustments, the door released with a subtle click. The team exchanged impressed glances as they moved inside. Morgan had just demonstrated a level of insight into Nexus operations that went beyond theoretical knowledge. She understood not just their tactical approach, but their technical methodologies as well. As they penetrated deeper into the facility, signs of recent activity became more evident. Specialized equipment had been installed in the main laboratory spaces, and security measures increased in sophistication. Morgan led them toward the most isolated section of the building, where heavy reinforcement and dedicated power systems indicated a high-security area. "They'll be keeping Crawford and Torres separate," she whispered to Lieutenant Walker. "Standard interrogation protocol to prevent coordinated resistance. Based on the facility layout, Torres will be in the main lab where they can leverage his technical expertise with the equipment. Crawford will be in a more conventional holding area." Walker nodded and divided the team accordingly, sending 4 operators with Morgan toward the main laboratory while taking the remainder to search for Crawford. As Morgan's group approached the lab area, they detected voices. 2 men discussing technical specifications in the precise language of weapons development. Morgan signaled for the team to hold position while she edged forward to assess the situation. Through a partially open door, she could see Marcus Torres, seated at a workstation, surrounded by equipment that hadn't been part of the original facility. He looked exhausted but uninjured, working under the supervision of 2 Nexus operatives who maintained a professional but clearly threatening presence. She returned to the team and outlined what she had seen. Torres appears to be cooperating but under duress. 2 guards, armed but casual. They don't expect interference. There may be additional personnel in adjacent rooms. The team leader, a seasoned sergeant, outlined a quick entry plan. "Standard breach and clear. We take the guards before they can react to Torres." Morgan shook her head. "Nexus will have contingencies. If Torres is threatened, they'll have dead man protocols in place." She pointed to the ceiling. "See those sensors? They're monitoring vital signs. If Torres shows sudden stress indicators or the guards fail to check in on schedule, emergency protocols will activate." She studied the layout, applying the same analytical approach she would use to plan a complex structural reinforcement. "We need to isolate the monitoring systems first, then secure Torres before the guards realize anything's wrong." Working with the team's technical specialist, Morgan identified the control node for the monitoring system and developed a plan to create a feedback loop that would mask their entry. The approach required precise timing and technical expertise, but it played to the strengths of both the marine operators and Morgan's engineering background. When they executed the plan, it worked with clinical efficiency. The monitoring system continued to display normal readings while the team neutralized the guards and secured Torres. The weapons specialist stared in shock as Morgan approached him, recognition dawning on his face. "Major Everett?" he whispered, disbelief evident in his voice. "They told us you were killed with the rest of the team." "That was the official story," Morgan replied, working to free him from the restraints that kept him at the workstation. "Are you injured?" Torres shook his head. "Nothing serious. But they've had me working on reconstructing the targeting system from memory. I've been trying to build in flaws without them noticing, but they're bringing in additional specialists to verify my work." Morgan nodded, understanding the implications. "What about Crawford? Do you know where they're keeping her?" "Lower level, I think. I've heard them mention interrogation sessions. They don't trust her the way they think they can trust me with the technical work." Torres looked around anxiously. "These aren't regular Nexus operatives, Major. The ones in charge are from the inner circle, the same people who compromised Phantom Shield." This information heightened the urgency. Morgan contacted Lieutenant Walker's team, who had located the holding area but encountered heavier resistance than expected. "We have Torres," she reported. "Status on Crawford?" "We've identified her location," Walker replied, her voice tight with controlled tension. "But we're pinned down by unexpected security personnel. They've implemented some kind of lockdown protocol." Morgan exchanged glances with the team leader. "Nexus is activating their contingency plan. We need to move fast." She turned to Torres. "I need everything you know about their current security protocols. Not the standard Nexus approach, the specific modifications this team has implemented." Torres quickly outlined what he had observed during his captivity. Specialized counter-infiltration measures, non-standard communication protocols, and a hierarchical command structure that differed from typical Nexus operations. Morgan integrated this information with her own knowledge, developing a modified approach to reach Crawford before Nexus could implement their full emergency protocols. "Lieutenant," she communicated to Walker, "we're coming to support your position. Be advised. Nexus will flood the lower level with incapacitating agents through the ventilation system if they believe extraction is imminent. Standard protocol when high-value assets are at risk." Walker acknowledged the warning as Morgan led her team toward the lower level, moving with the urgency of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. Not just the immediate rescue mission, but the broader implications of Nexus acquiring the Phantom Shield technology. As they descended toward Crawford's location, Morgan found herself drawing on both aspects of her dual existence, the tactical precision of Major Everett and the structural problem-solving of Morgan Hayes. The skills that had made her exceptional in both worlds were now being combined in a way she had never anticipated when she had walked away from the Corps 12 years ago. The rescue operation was about to reach its critical phase, and Morgan knew that the outcome would determine not just Crawford's fate, but potentially her own future as well. The life she had carefully constructed as Morgan Hayes hung in the balance, threatened by the resurgence of the past she had thought was safely buried. The clock was ticking, Nexus protocols were activating, and the window for successful extraction was rapidly closing. But for the first time in 12 years, Major Morgan Everett was back in the field, applying her unique combination of skills to the mission that had once cost her everything. This time, she was determined to ensure a different outcome, for Crawford, for Torres, and for herself. The descent into the lower levels of the facility felt like moving through time, each step taking Morgan deeper into her past while simultaneously hurtling her toward an uncertain future. The team moved with practiced efficiency through the sterile corridors, navigating around security systems with the benefit of Torres's inside knowledge and Morgan's understanding of Nexus protocols. "They've activated secondary containment measures," Torres warned, pointing to nearly invisible indicators along the wall. "See those pressure sensors? They're preparing for emergency protocols." Morgan nodded. "Standard Nexus procedure when assets are compromised. They'll secure critical personnel and data, then implement a controlled destruction of the facility." She turned to the team sergeant. "We have less than 15 minutes before they initiate full lockdown." The sergeant relayed this information to Lieutenant Walker's team, who reported increasing resistance near Crawford's location. 4 operators, professional-grade tactics. Walker's voice came through with the controlled tension of someone in active combat. They're buying time for something. Not something, Morgan corrected. Someone. Nexus leadership won't abandon this operation without direct intervention. Stay alert for high-level operatives attempting to extract critical data or personnel. As they approached the junction leading to the lower containment area, Morgan halted the team with a raised hand. Her eyes had caught a subtle abnormality in the ceiling panel ahead, a variation in the air circulation pattern that didn't match the facility's design. Trap, she said quietly, pointing to the nearly invisible sensors. They've modified the emergency fire suppression system. Cross that threshold, and they'll flood the corridor with incapacitating agents. The technical specialist examined the system and confirmed her assessment. How did you spot that? 12 years of identifying structural weaknesses and code violations, Morgan replied, already analyzing alternative approaches. No competent engineer would design an air circulation system with that pattern unless it served a specific, non-standard purpose. She studied the facility layout on her tactical display, applying the same analytical process she would use to solve a complex structural problem on a construction site. There's a maintenance access through the mechanical room, 2 corridors back. It'll bypass their sensor grid and bring us out behind their defensive position. The sergeant looked skeptical. That's not on our schematics. It wouldn't be, Morgan explained, but standard building codes require maintenance access to all critical systems. I'd bet my professional license that the access exists. Nexus modifies security, but they maintain basic infrastructure integrity to avoid attracting attention from building inspectors. The team backtracked to the mechanical room where, just as Morgan had predicted, they found a maintenance access panel behind equipment racks. The narrow passageway beyond was tight but navigable, designed for technicians to access critical systems without disrupting normal facility operations. As they crawled through the confined space, Torres whispered to Morgan, 12 years as a construction worker? That's where you've been. Construction specialist, Morgan corrected automatically. Structural engineering and project management. Of all the covers you could have chosen. Torres shook his head in amazement. It wasn't a cover, Morgan replied, her voice carrying quiet conviction. It became my life. I build things now, Torres. Things that last. Things that protect people rather than places designed to break them. The passage ended at a ventilation grate that opened into a corridor behind the Nexus defensive position. Morgan could hear the intermittent sound of suppressed weapons fire as Walker's team maintained pressure on the Nexus operatives from the front. Using hand signals, Morgan coordinated with the sergeant for a simultaneous breach from both directions. On his count, they removed the grate and emerged into the corridor just as Walker's team intensified their suppressing fire from the opposite approach. The coordinated attack caught the Nexus team in a perfect crossfire. Within seconds, 3 of the 4 operatives were neutralized, while the 4th surrendered after realizing his position was untenable. Morgan approached the captured operative, studying his tactical gear with professional interest. Inner Circle Security Detail, she identified, noting specific equipment modifications. This man reports directly to Nexus leadership. She addressed him directly. Where is Diane Crawford? The man maintained a professional silence, his eyes revealing nothing. Morgan wasn't surprised. Nexus operatives underwent extensive counter-interrogation training. Instead of pressing him, she turned to examine the security door he had been defending. Crawford is behind this door, she stated with certainty, and they've rigged it with fail-safes. She studied the locking mechanism with the careful assessment of someone who regularly analyzed complex mechanical systems. Multiple redundant security measures plus what appears to be an explosive failsafe designed to trigger if the primary systems are compromised. Lieutenant Walker joined her, examining the formidable barrier. Can we bypass it? Not quickly, Morgan replied, already considering alternatives. But we don't need to. She turned to the captured operative. Your leadership has already initiated facility abandonment protocols. They've left you behind to delay us, which means Crawford is considered expendable at this point. You've been sacrificed for nothing. A flicker of doubt crossed the man's eyes. just enough to confirm Morgan's assessment. She pressed the advantage. Standard Nexus protocol includes elimination of compromised assets. That includes field operators who've been captured. You're as expendable as Crawford now. Walker caught on to Morgan's strategy. We can offer protection in exchange for cooperation. Official recognition of assistance to U.S. forces. The Nexus operative weighed his options, professional calculation evident in his expression. After several tense moments, he nodded toward a specific panel beside the door. Secondary override is behind that access point. Biometric lock keyed to my retinal pattern. Under careful supervision, the operative was allowed to activate the override. The heavy security door disengaged with a series of mechanical clicks, revealing a sterile interrogation room beyond. Diane Crawford was secured to a chair in the center, monitoring equipment surrounding her. Despite evident exhaustion and signs of psychological pressure, she appeared physically unharmed. Her eyes widened in disbelief when Morgan stepped into the room. Everett, but you're dead? Not quite. Morgan moved quickly to free her from the restraints. Are you injured? Crawford shook her head. Nothing permanent. But they know, Morgan. They know everything about Phantom Shield. What went wrong? Why it failed. Her voice dropped lower. And they know about you. They've been looking for you for years. This confirmation of Morgan's suspicions was troubling but not unexpected. She helped Crawford to her feet, supporting her as they moved toward the exit. What exactly were they trying to extract from you? The targeting algorithms, Crawford replied. They already had most of the hardware specifications from Torres, but the proprietary targeting system was compartmentalized. I helped design the parameters, while Torres implemented the deployment architecture. As they rejoined the full team in the corridor, Morgan quickly assessed their situation. They had rescued both high-value targets and neutralized the immediate Nexus threat, but the facility's emergency protocols were still activating around them. Warning lights had begun to flash along the corridors, and security barriers were engaging throughout the complex. They're initiating facility purge protocols, Morgan warned, recognizing the pattern from her previous encounters with Nexus. We have less than 10 minutes to clear the building before environmental systems are compromised and evidence destruction begins. The team began their extraction, moving with disciplined urgency through the facility. Morgan supported Crawford while Torres kept pace beside them, both scientists still processing the shock of Morgan's unexpected resurrection. 12 years, Crawford marveled quietly as they navigated a security checkpoint. The world thought you died with your team. What have you been doing all this time? Building things, Morgan replied simply. Structures that protect people, instead of weapons that harm them. As they reached the main level of the facility, sensors detected additional movement from the administrative wing, a small group moving with tactical precision toward a helipad on the roof. Nexus leadership, Morgan identified immediately. They're extracting with whatever data they've already secured. Lieutenant Walker checked her tactical display. Should we pursue? Morgan calculated their options with the cool precision of someone accustomed to making critical decisions under pressure. Negative. Primary mission is securing Crawford and Torres. We don't have the numbers to split the team, and the facility purge is already initiating. The decision was tactically sound, but Morgan felt the weight of knowing that key Nexus leadership, potentially including people directly responsible for her team's deaths 12 years ago, were escaping. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the immediate priority of getting everyone out safely. As they approached the facility's main exit, the building's environmental systems began to change perceptibly, air pressure fluctuating as ventilation systems prepared to circulate purging agents throughout the complex. Move! Morgan ordered, recognizing the signs from her previous Nexus encounter. They've accelerated the timeline. The team broke into a controlled run, Morgan supporting Crawford while two operators assisted Torres. Behind them, alarm systems wailed as the facility began its self-destruction sequence, not with dramatic explosions, but with the methodical elimination of evidence through chemical purging agents and targeted structural failures designed to appear as natural building collapse. They cleared the main doors just as emergency seals engaged behind them, securing the facility for its final purge cycle. The team maintained their pace across the compound, heading for the extraction point, where helicopters waited to transport them back to Camp Pendleton. As they reached the perimeter fence, Morgan glanced back at the facility. Through the windows, she could see controlled fires beginning to consume documentation and equipment, Nexus erasing all evidence of their presence with professional thoroughness. On the roof, a helicopter was already lifting off, carrying Nexus leadership away from the compromised operation. The sight stirred complex emotions in Morgan. 12 years earlier, a similar Nexus escape had occurred as her team lay dying around her in the sand. The architects of that disaster vanishing while she survived only through a combination of luck, skill, and sheer determination. Now history was partially repeating itself, though this time she had managed to rescue the targeted personnel before Nexus could complete their operation. As they boarded their own extraction helicopters, Morgan found herself seated across from Crawford and Torres, 3 survivors of Operation Phantom Shield, reconnected by circumstances none of them could have anticipated. The aircraft lifted off, carrying them away from the Nexus facility as it continued its controlled self-destruction behind them. "What happens now?" Torres asked, his voice barely audible over the helicopter's engines. Morgan met his gaze steadily. "You and Crawford will receive full protection. The technology you helped develop will remain secure, and Nexus will continue hunting for what they failed to acquire tonight." "And you?" Crawford pressed. "What happens to Morgan Hayes, or is it Major Everett again now?" The question crystallized the choice that Morgan had been contemplating since her extraction from the construction site that morning. For 12 years, she had built a life as Morgan Hayes, a life with meaning, purpose, and a different kind of service than her military career had offered. Now that life had been compromised, but not necessarily destroyed. "That remains to be determined," she replied, turning to look out the helicopter window at the distant lights of San Diego passing beneath them. Dawn was breaking over Camp Pendleton when the helicopters touched down. Medical teams immediately took charge of Crawford and Torres, while the tactical team debriefed with Colonel Davidson and intelligence officers. Morgan found herself in an unusual position, neither fully civilian nor fully military, operating in a liminal space between her 2 identities. Secretary Garfield was waiting in the command center, her expression reflecting both satisfaction at the mission's success and concern about its broader implications. "Crawford and Torres are secure," she acknowledged as Morgan entered, "but Nexus leadership escaped with at least some of the Phantom Shield data." Morgan nodded. "They have components, but not the complete system. Based on what Crawford and Torres have shared, Nexus acquired the hardware specifications but only portions of the targeting algorithms. Without the complete system, they have advanced parts but not a functional whole." "Small comfort," the secretary replied, "but better than complete compromise." She studied Morgan thoughtfully. "You performed exceptionally tonight, Major. Your insights into Nexus operations were invaluable, and your tactical instincts remained sharp despite your years away from the field." "Construction sites have their own kind of combat zones, Madam Secretary," Morgan observed with a slight smile. "Different stakes, same principles. Identify weaknesses, reinforce critical points, anticipate failure scenarios." Garfield nodded. "An apt comparison. And it raises the question of what comes next for you." She gestured toward a conference room where Colonel Davidson and Director Prescott waited. "We need to discuss your future, Major Everett, or Ms. Hayes if you prefer." The meeting that followed presented Morgan with options she had never anticipated when she had walked onto the Ridgeline Construction site the previous morning. Secretary Garfield outlined the situation with characteristic directness. "Your status as officially deceased has been invalidated by tonight's events. Nexus now knows you're alive, which means your civilian identity as Morgan Hayes is compromised. However, your official military status has been reinstated, creating new possibilities." Colonel Davidson elaborated. "We're prepared to offer you formal reactivation at your previous rank, with appropriate adjustments for time served. Your experience with both Nexus operations and the Phantom Shield technology makes you uniquely valuable to ongoing counterintelligence efforts. Alternatively," Director Prescott added, "we can establish a new civilian identity for you, complete documentation, background history, professional credentials. You could resume your construction career in a different location, under a different name." Morgan considered these options thoughtfully. Both represented a significant departure from the life she had built over the past 12 years. Neither allowed her to simply return to Ridgeline Construction as if nothing had happened. "There is a third option," she said finally, "one that leverages both aspects of my experience." She outlined her proposal, a specialized role that would combine her military background with her civilian expertise, focusing on critical infrastructure security against both conventional and asymmetric threats. Not a return to combat operations, but not a complete separation from her military training either. Many of our most vulnerable targets are structural in nature, she explained. Power grids, communications networks, transportation hubs, all systems that I understand from both an engineering and security perspective. My experience at Ridgeline has given me insights into how these systems are built and maintained. My military background helps me identify how they might be targeted. Secretary Garfield exchanged glances with Colonel Davidson, considering the proposal. A hybrid role, she summarized. Neither fully military nor fully civilian, but incorporating elements of both. Exactly, Morgan confirmed. And it would allow me to maintain aspects of my current life while addressing the security concerns created by Nexus's awareness of my survival. The discussion continued into the morning, refining the parameters of this unprecedented position. By noon, a framework had been established. Morgan would serve as a special advisor for critical infrastructure security, operating with military authority but maintaining her civilian engineering credentials. Her official status would be re-established, but with classified parameters that protected certain details of her history. When the meeting concluded, Morgan found herself alone with Colonel Davidson. The officer studied her with professional curiosity. 12 years in construction, he mused. Most operators who go into deep cover choose something less demanding. Morgan smiled slightly. It wasn't about maintaining cover, Colonel. It was about building something that would last. In the Corps, I specialized in taking things apart, finding weaknesses, exploiting vulnerabilities. As Morgan Hayes, I learned to create structures that withstand those same pressures. Davidson nodded thoughtfully. And now you'll do both. In a manner of speaking, Morgan agreed, though I prefer to think of it as applying the same principles in different contexts. Whether I'm assessing a bridge for structural integrity or evaluating a security system for vulnerabilities, I'm identifying potential failure points and implementing solutions. Your team at Ridgeline, Davidson said. Will you have a chance to explain? To say goodbye? The question touched on something Morgan had been considering since her abrupt extraction from the construction site. I've requested that as part of my transition, she confirmed. They deserve that much, especially after 12 years. 3 days later, Morgan returned to Portland under discreet security protocols. The Ridgeline construction site looked exactly as she had left it, the partially completed federal administrative complex rising from its foundations, crews working with the choreographed efficiency of a well-managed project. For a moment, she simply observed from a distance, appreciating the familiar rhythm of the work. Sam Donovan spotted her first as she approached the site office. His expression registered surprise, then relief. Hayes, where the hell have you been? Those government types said you were consulting on some security matter, but that was days ago with no word. Morgan smiled. It's a long story, Sam. Is the crew around? I'd like to speak with everyone. Word spread quickly through the site. Within minutes, workers were gathering around, curious about their colleague's mysterious disappearance and sudden return. Tom Reeves pushed through the crowd, his expression a mixture of concern and knowing expectation. Figured you'd come back eventually, he said quietly, even if just to tie up loose ends. Morgan nodded, appreciating his perceptiveness. Some explanations are owed. When the crew had assembled, Morgan addressed them directly. Her tone carried the quiet authority they had come to respect over years of working together, but with a new dimension of formal command that hadn't been present before. For 12 years, I've had the privilege of working alongside each of you, she began, building structures that will stand for generations, creating something meaningful and lasting. That work has been more important to me than you might realize. She paused, carefully considering her next words. Recent events have created a situation where I need to step away from Ridgeline. I can't share all the details, but I wanted to explain personally rather than simply disappearing. Eddie shifted uncomfortably. This have something to do with those Marines who showed up? And the government guys who took you away? Morgan nodded. Yes. Before I joined Ridgeline, I served in another capacity. That past has resurfaced in ways that make it impossible for me to continue here. Military, Tom stated rather than asked. Marine Corps, if I had to guess. Something classified. Morgan met his gaze, neither confirming nor denying, but allowing her expression to acknowledge his insight. What I can tell you is that the work we've done together has been genuine. Every structure, every project, every solution we've developed, that was real craftsmanship, real engineering, real purpose. She looked around at the assembled crew, men and women she had worked alongside for years, sharing the satisfaction of creating something substantial and enduring. The buildings we've constructed will stand long after all of us are gone. They'll shelter people, support communities, and enable important work to happen. There's profound meaning in that kind of legacy. Sam Donovan stepped forward, extending his hand. You're the best structural specialist I've ever worked with, Hayes. Whatever this new assignment is, they're lucky to have you. Morgan shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Sam, for everything. One by one, the crew members approached to say their goodbyes. Some simply shook hands. Others shared brief reminiscences about projects they had completed together. Eddie mentioned the West Ridge earthquake, when Morgan's additional supports had prevented catastrophic collapse. Others recalled challenging problems she had solved with innovative approaches. Tom Reeves was the last to approach. I always knew there was more to your story, he said quietly. Never figured it would take Marines to bring it out. Morgan smiled. You saw more than most, Tom. Always asking the right questions, even when I couldn't give you the answers. Will you be okay? He asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. Whatever this is about, whatever pulled you away, is it something you're choosing or something being forced on you? The question struck at the heart of Morgan's complex transition. A bit of both, she admitted, but I'm finding a path forward that honors both parts of who I am. That's more than I expected 3 days ago. Tom nodded, understanding what she couldn't explicitly say. If you ever need someone who knows their way around electrical systems, someone discreet, you know how to find me. Morgan thanked him for the offer, recognizing it for the gesture of friendship and trust it represented. As she prepared to leave the construction site for the final time, she took a moment to look up at the partially completed federal administrative complex. The structural framework she had helped design and implement would soon be enclosed, the exposed beams and supports hidden behind walls and ceilings. But they would remain there, doing their essential work unseen, supporting, stabilizing, protecting. There was a metaphor in that, she reflected, that applied to her own transition. The visible role of Morgan Hayes, construction specialist, was ending. But the core principles and skills she had developed would continue in her new capacity, supporting different kinds of structures in different kinds of ways. As she walked toward the waiting government vehicle, Morgan carried with her the lessons of both her lives, the tactical precision of Major Everett and the constructive vision of Morgan Hayes. The path ahead would integrate these seemingly disparate experiences into something new and uniquely valuable. Behind her, the Ridgeline crew returned to their work, continuing the process of building something that would endure. Morgan smiled at the symmetry. In her new role, she would be doing the same, constructing security frameworks designed to protect critical infrastructure against threats both seen and unseen. Different materials, different challenges, but the same fundamental purpose, building something that would last. 6 months after leaving Ridgeline Construction, Morgan Everett stood in the command center of the newly established Critical Infrastructure Protection Division in Washington, D.C. Wall-mounted displays showed real-time monitoring of key facilities across the nation: power grids, communication networks, transportation hubs, and government installations. Each represented structural systems that Morgan now helped protect rather than build. The analysis from the Seattle port facility just came in. Lieutenant Commander Reyes reported, handing Morgan a tablet. Vulnerability assessment complete. Recommended modifications flagged for review. Morgan scanned the report with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to evaluating complex structural systems. Good work, but these load-bearing reinforcements won't be sufficient if they're using the approach we identified in San Diego. Double the structural integrity parameters and incorporate the passive monitoring systems we developed for the Houston project. Reyes nodded, making notes. I'll have the revisions completed by 1,800 hours. The transition from construction specialist to security advisor had been smoother than Morgan might have expected. Her unique combination of military tactical experience and civilian engineering expertise had proved invaluable in identifying vulnerabilities that specialists from either background might miss. Where military security experts saw defensive protocols, Morgan saw structural support systems. Where civilian engineers saw building codes, she recognized security frameworks. Director William Prescott entered the command center, accompanied by Secretary Garfield. Both had been instrumental in establishing the new division under Joint Military and Homeland Security jurisdiction. Major Everett, the secretary greeted her. Your team's work on the Port Security Initiative has drawn attention at the highest levels. The president specifically mentioned the innovative structural countermeasures during this morning's security briefing. Morgan acknowledged the compliment with a professional nod. The credit belongs to the entire team. We're integrating approaches from multiple disciplines to create more resilient systems. That integration is precisely why this division exists, Prescott observed. And why you're uniquely qualified to lead it. He gestured toward the conference room. We have a developing situation that requires your particular perspective. In the secure briefing room, Morgan found Colonel Blackwood waiting alongside several intelligence analysts. A tactical display showed satellite imagery of a remote industrial facility in Eastern Europe. 3 days ago, we detected unusual activity at this location, Blackwood began without preamble. Initial assessment suggested routine industrial operations, but deeper analysis revealed security patterns consistent with Nexus protocols. Morgan studied the imagery with focused attention. What's the official designation for this facility? Agricultural equipment manufacturing, one of the analysts replied. But power consumption and material deliveries don't match that profile. We believe it's a front for something else entirely. Morgan zoomed in on specific sections of the facility, analyzing the structural layout with professional interest. The reinforcement patterns in the main building aren't standard industrial design. They're consistent with specialized research facilities, similar to what we saw at the San Diego location. She indicated specific architectural features that most observers would overlook, but that her trained eye immediately recognized. These aren't just security measures. They're structural modifications designed to support specialized equipment. Heavy vibration dampening, electromagnetic shielding, isolated power systems. Blackwood nodded. Our analysis suggests Nexus is attempting to reconstruct the Phantom Shield technology, using the partial data they acquired during the San Diego operation. They won't succeed, Morgan stated with professional certainty. At least not fully. Crawford and Torres have confirmed that critical algorithms were never compromised. Without those components, they can build approximations but not a functional replica. That's our assessment as well, Secretary Garfield agreed. However, even a partially functional system could have significant security implications if deployed against critical infrastructure targets. Morgan considered this with the careful analysis she would apply to a complex structural problem. If they can't build a complete system, they'll adapt what they have for more limited applications. Focus on vulnerabilities they can exploit with the capabilities they've managed to reconstruct. She turned to the tactical display, highlighting specific sections of the facility. Based on the structural configuration, they're focusing on power grid vulnerabilities. The reinforcement patterns and power distribution systems are consistent with equipment designed to generate targeted electromagnetic pulses, rather than the precision disruption the original Phantom Shield system was designed for. The implications were immediately apparent to everyone in the room. While the original technology had been designed for surgical precision, Nexus was developing a blunter instrument, one capable of disabling entire power distribution networks rather than selectively targeting specific systems. If they succeed, Morgan continued, they could potentially disable critical infrastructure across major urban centers, not with the precision of the original technology, but with devastating effectiveness nonetheless. Secretary Garfield turned to Colonel Blackwood. Options? Standard procedure would be a coordinated international operation with local authorities, Blackwood replied. But given the sensitive nature of the technology and Nexus's extensive influence network, that approach carries significant operational security risks. Morgan studied the facility layout more closely, applying the analytical approach that had made her exceptional in both her military and civilian careers. There's another option, she said finally. One that leverages both the technology they're trying to develop and the structural vulnerabilities of the facility itself. She outlined a plan that combined tactical precision with engineering insight, a targeted operation designed not to seize the facility or capture personnel, but to compromise the research itself through structural vulnerabilities that would appear as design failures rather than external intervention. If we calibrate the approach correctly, she explained, we can trigger cascading system failures that will appear as engineering miscalculations rather than deliberate sabotage. Nexus will believe their own design flaws caused the failure. The proposal represented a perfect integration of Morgan's dual expertise, the tactical thinking of a force recon officer combined with the structural analysis of a construction specialist. It would neutralize the threat without revealing U.S. awareness of the operation, preserving intelligence advantages for future countermeasures. After thorough discussion and refinement, Secretary Garfield authorized the operation. A small team would be deployed, led by Morgan herself, her first field operation since the rescue of Crawford and Torres 6 months earlier. "Are you certain you want to take this assignment personally?" Prescott asked when the others had departed. "You've established a valuable command position here. Field operations represent unnecessary risk for someone with your unique expertise." Morgan met his gaze steadily. "This operation requires both tactical and engineering insights implemented in real time. I'm the most qualified person to make those assessments on the ground." What remained unspoken was the personal element. This mission represented an opportunity to directly counter the organization that had destroyed her original team and forced her into a decade of anonymous existence. While Morgan had found meaning and purpose in her construction career, the unresolved nature of the Phantom Shield disaster had remained a shadow over that life. 2 days later, Morgan stood in a staging area in Poland, briefing the small specialized team that would accompany her across the border. The 4 operators, 2 Marine Force Recon and 2 Army Special Forces, listened intently as she outlined the mission parameters. "This isn't a standard tactical operation," she explained, displaying detailed structural schematics of the target facility. "We're not seeking to engage hostile forces or extract intelligence. Our objective is to implement specific structural modifications that will trigger cascading system failures without being identified as external sabotage." She highlighted key access points and critical systems. "We'll enter through these maintenance tunnels, which their security protocols don't adequately monitor because they're considered structural elements rather than access points. Once inside, we'll modify specific power regulation systems and structural support elements to create precisely calculated weaknesses." Captain Miller, one of the Force Recon operators, studied the approach with professional interest. "So instead of attacking their operation directly, we're essentially causing their own systems to fail from within." "Exactly," Morgan confirmed. "Engineering-based sabotage rather than tactical intervention. When properly executed, they'll attribute the failures to design flaws rather than external interference." The team spent the next 12 hours refining their approach, with Morgan providing detailed instructions on the specific modifications required. Her explanation combined tactical precision with engineering expertise in a way that impressed even the experienced special operations personnel. "Never worked with someone who could break down both the tactical and technical aspects so thoroughly," Sergeant Wright commented during equipment preparation. "Usually we get specialists from one side or the other, never both integrated so seamlessly." Morgan checked her specialized toolkit, a combination of tactical equipment and precision engineering instruments. 12 years in construction taught me to see buildings as integrated systems rather than just structures. Every component connects to others, creating both strengths and vulnerabilities. Understanding those relationships is critical, whether you're building something to last or identifying how to compromise it. The operation launched under cover of darkness, with the team crossing the border via specialized aircraft that deposited them in remote terrain 30 kilometers from the target. They moved on foot through dense forest, avoiding populated areas and security checkpoints with the practiced efficiency of elite operators. Morgan moved with them, her military training returning with fluid naturalness despite the years spent in civilian work. The physical conditioning from construction work, lifting heavy materials, climbing structures, maintaining balance on precarious surfaces, had kept her in excellent operational shape. What might have atrophied for others during 12 years away from military service had been maintained through the daily demands of her civilian profession. As they approached the facility perimeter, Morgan led them to a drainage culvert that did not appear on standard facility schematics, but that she had identified through structural analysis of the surrounding terrain. Drainage and waste management systems are often overlooked in security protocols, she explained quietly as they prepared to enter. Engineers designed them according to environmental requirements rather than security parameters, creating inconsistencies that can be exploited. The approach proved accurate. The drainage system provided access beneath the facility's primary security perimeter, allowing the team to infiltrate without triggering external monitoring systems. Once inside the outer boundary, Morgan guided them toward maintenance access points that connected to the facility's structural support systems. The primary research equipment will be housed in this central section, she indicated, on their tactical display. The structural reinforcement necessary to support that equipment creates specific requirements for power distribution and vibration dampening. Those are our targets. Moving through narrow maintenance passages that circumvented standard security protocols, the team reached the first target area, a power regulation system designed to provide stable energy to sensitive research equipment. Morgan examined the setup with professional interest, noting where Nexus engineers had modified standard designs to accommodate specialized needs. These modifications reveal what they're trying to build, she observed, pointing to specific adaptations. They've reinforced power handling capacity well beyond normal requirements and implemented specialized stabilization systems. Classic indicators of equipment designed to generate controlled electromagnetic pulses. With practice precision, she made subtle modifications to critical components, not disabling them entirely, but introducing precisely calculated vulnerabilities that would cause cascading failures under specific load conditions. When they attempt full power testing, she explained to Captain Miller, who was providing security while she worked, these systems will appear to function normally at first, but as power loads increase, the modified components will create harmonic instabilities that their monitoring systems won't detect until catastrophic failure occurs. And they'll think it's their own design flaw, Miller nodded appreciatively. Elegant. The team progressed through the facility, implementing similar modifications to structural support systems, cooling infrastructure, and vibration dampening mechanisms. Each change was carefully calculated to appear as an engineering oversight rather than deliberate sabotage, designed to trigger failure only under specific operational conditions that would occur during system testing. As they reached the central research area, Morgan's structural expertise proved invaluable in identifying critical support systems without directly accessing the heavily secured main laboratory. By targeting the surrounding infrastructure, the literal and figurative foundations supporting the research, they could compromise the entire operation without ever entering the most protected areas. Engineering is about understanding how systems interact under stress, Morgan explained as she modified a critical cooling junction. Whether you're building something to withstand pressure or creating controlled failure points, the principles are the same. You're analyzing load paths, stress distributions, and failure thresholds. The operation proceeded with methodical efficiency until they reached the final target area, a specialized power distribution node that connected the facility's main electrical system to the research equipment. As Morgan worked on the critical modifications, movement in an adjacent corridor alerted the team to approaching security personnel. Routine patrol, Sergeant Wright reported quietly from his observation position. 2 operators, standard sweep pattern. Morgan continued her work without interruption, her hands steady as she implemented the final modifications. Years of performing precise structural adjustments under challenging conditions on construction sites had prepared her for exactly this kind of pressure, making critical changes while maintaining absolute focus regardless of surrounding circumstances. Modifications complete, she reported as she secured the access panel, leaving no visible evidence of their intervention. All targets implemented according to specifications. The team withdrew through the same maintenance passages they had used for entry, carefully erasing evidence of their presence as they retreated. By the time they cleared the facility perimeter and began their exfiltration across country, there was nothing to indicate the facility had been compromised. No alarms, no pursuit, no indication that anything had changed. Yet everything had changed. Within the facility's critical systems, precisely calculated vulnerabilities now existed, engineering time bombs waiting to trigger catastrophic failures that would appear as design flaws rather than sabotage. 3 days later, Morgan stood in the command center in Washington, monitoring classified intelligence feeds from Eastern Europe. Initial reports indicated a, quote, catastrophic equipment failure at the industrial facility they had infiltrated, resulting in the complete destruction of research materials and specialized equipment. Local authorities were investigating what appeared to be Engineering deficiencies in critical power management systems. Worked exactly as you predicted, Colonel Blackwood commented, reviewing the incoming intelligence. They're attributing it to their own design flaws. No indication of external intervention detected. Morgan nodded, studying the structural failure reports with professional interest. The cascading systems collapse had followed precisely the pattern she had anticipated, with each compromised component triggering failures in connected systems until the entire research apparatus was rendered unusable. They'll try again, she observed. Nexus doesn't abandon objectives easily. But they've lost months of research and the confidence of their financial backers. More importantly, they'll be questioning their own engineering capabilities rather than looking for external sabotage. Secretary Garfield joined them, reviewing the operation results with evident satisfaction. This represents a new approach to countering asymmetric threats, one that leverages your unique combination of skills, Major. Engineering-based countermeasures implemented with tactical precision. Morgan acknowledged the assessment. It's about understanding systems holistically, seeing how structural elements interact with security protocols, how physical vulnerabilities connect to operational weaknesses. That perspective comes from integrating different disciplines rather than treating them as separate domains. In the months that followed, Morgan's division expanded its operations, developing increasingly sophisticated approaches to critical infrastructure protection. The integration of tactical security with engineering expertise created new methodologies for both defending American assets and countering threats from organizations like Nexus. 1 year after leaving Ridgeline Construction, Morgan found herself overseeing the security implementation for a major government facility being constructed in Virginia. The project brought her full circle, applying her construction expertise to ensure the new structure incorporated security elements at the foundational level rather than as afterthoughts. As she walked the construction site with the project manager, Morgan found herself automatically assessing the work with her builder's eye, noting quality of materials, precision of installation, adherence to structural principles. Some habits remained deeply ingrained despite her transition to security work. "Major Everett?" a voice called from behind her. "I was told I might find you here." Morgan turned to find Tom Reeves standing at the edge of the construction area, looking somewhat out of place in his work clothes amid the government personnel and security contractors. "Tom," she greeted him with genuine surprise. "What brings you to Virginia?" "Got an interesting job offer," he replied with a slight smile. "Specialized electrical systems for high-security installations." The recruiter mentioned they were looking for people with both technical expertise and discretion. His expression suggested he understood the connection. "Thought it might be your doing." Morgan smiled. "I may have suggested certain professionals from my Ridgeline days who combined exceptional skills with appropriate security potential." They walked to a quieter area of the site, away from the immediate construction activity. "How's the crew back at Ridgeline?" Morgan asked. "Doing well. The federal administrative complex is nearly complete. Those structural reinforcements you designed are already being studied as a model for future projects." Tom studied her for a moment. "You look different in this role. Not just the uniform, but the way you carry yourself. More like who you really are, I'm guessing." Morgan considered this assessment. Not more, just more complete. Morgan Hayes wasn't a fiction. She was a genuine part of who I am. The work we did at Ridgeline matters just as much as what I'm doing now. Tom nodded, understanding. Building versus protecting. Different sides of the same coin. "Exactly," Morgan agreed. "Understanding how to build something properly is the foundation for knowing how to protect it effectively. The years I spent as a construction specialist weren't just cover. They were essential training for what I'm doing now." She gestured toward the facility rising around them. "This building incorporates security elements directly into its structural design, not as separate systems, but as integrated components. That approach comes directly from my experience at Ridgeline, seeing how structural integrity connects to overall system resilience." As they walked the perimeter of the construction site, Morgan pointed out features that reflected this integrated approach: how load-bearing elements doubled as security barriers, how circulation systems incorporated defensive capabilities, how seemingly ordinary structural components served multiple purposes. "It's revolutionary," Tom commented, recognizing the engineering innovation underlying the security applications. "Most security gets layered onto existing structures. This builds it into the foundation itself." "That's the core principle of what we're developing," Morgan confirmed. security that emerges from structural integrity rather than being imposed upon it. The best defenses are those that appear to be something else entirely, just like the best cover identities are those built on authentic foundations. Later that evening, after showing Tom the electrical systems he would be helping implement, Morgan stood alone on the partially completed upper level of the facility. From this vantage point, she could see both the structure taking shape around her and the landscape it was designed to protect. The past 18 months had transformed her life in ways she could never have anticipated when the Marines had first recognized her at the Ridgeline Construction site. What had initially seemed like the end of the life she had built had instead become an integration of her seemingly separate identities. The tactical precision of Major Everett merged with the structural expertise of Morgan Hayes, creating something more valuable than either alone. Her phone vibrated with an incoming message, a security alert from the monitoring systems tracking potential Nexus activities. The organization had gone underground after the Eastern European operation, but intelligence suggested they were regrouping, adapting to the setbacks, preparing new approaches. The work of countering them would continue, requiring both vigilance and innovation. Morgan studied the alert, already analyzing potential responses with the integrated perspective that had become her signature approach. Where others saw separate problems, tactical threats, engineering challenges, security vulnerabilities, she perceived interconnected systems, each influencing the others in ways that created both weaknesses and opportunities. As twilight settled over the construction site, workers began securing equipment for the night, their headlamps creating moving points of light across the emerging structure. Morgan watched them with appreciation, recognizing the craftsmanship and dedication they brought to their work, the same quality she had valued in her colleagues at Ridgeline. Tomorrow, she would return to the command center in Washington, resuming her role coordinating critical infrastructure protection across multiple agencies and jurisdictions. But tonight, standing amid the skeletal framework of a building under construction, she felt the continuity between her past and present with particular clarity. For 12 years, she had built structures designed to shelter and support. Now she created systems designed to protect and defend. Different applications of the same fundamental principles, understanding how things were built in order to ensure they remained standing. Major Morgan Everett, former Force Recon officer and construction specialist, now integrated both aspects of her experience and service to a mission that drew upon the full spectrum of her capabilities. The dual life that had once been a necessity of survival had become a unique strength, a perspective few others could offer. As darkness fell completely, Morgan made one final circuit of the construction site, checking security measures with the thoroughness that had characterized her work in both her military and civilian careers. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to assess, new vulnerabilities to address. But the foundation she had built, both literally in the structures she had created and figuratively in the principles she had developed, would support whatever came next. The Marine Corps had taught her precision, discipline, and tactical awareness. Construction had taught her patience, structural integrity, and systems thinking. Combined, these seemingly disparate experiences had created something unique, a perspective that could both build and protect, create and defend, construct and secure. Morgan Hayes had spent 12 years working construction until Marines discovered her secret identity. But that discovery hadn't ended her story. It had transformed it, integrating separate chapters into a cohesive whole. What had initially appeared to be an ending had instead become a new beginning, one that honored both the path she had chosen and the one that had chosen her. As she departed the construction site, Morgan looked back one final time at the structure taking shape in the darkness. A building designed from its foundation to withstand challenges its occupants might never even perceive. There was profound satisfaction in that knowledge, a continuation of the purpose that had guided her through both her lives. Different materials, different challenges, but the same fundamental goal, building something that would last, protecting what mattered most. The secret identity hadn't been a disguise after all. It had been preparation for something greater. The integration of seemingly separate skills into a unified whole that was stronger and more resilient than either could have been alone. Just like the structure she had spent her life creating, Morgan Everett had built herself to withstand whatever pressures the world might apply, transforming potential points of failure into sources of unprecedented strength. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.